Hello and welcome to Video Game Hangover. I'm Randy Dickinson, and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hello, I'm DJ Ross in Mountain View, California.
Each week on Video Game Hangover, we talk about the games that have been keeping us up at night. On this week's show, as the 3DS and Wii U eShop closure looms, we're talking about must-play games for these legendary consoles.
Oh, so the highest anyone has ever spoken about the Wii U. I suppose it is legendary in its own right.
For different reasons than the 3DS, but for these noteworthy consoles, that doesn't sound terribly exciting.
I don't know. I got nothing.
I like the Wii U. I like the 3DS. I like them both in different ways. So
yeah.
I
definitely spent some time with the Wii U. My Monster Hunter machine. I feel like if it wasn't your Monster Hunter machine, you may have had a different experience. But I have fond memories of that weird long box.
Yeah, that was my Splatoon 2 machine more than anything. I think that was probably the game that I logged the most amount of hours on the Wii U.
Yeah.
But the Splatoon series obviously continues to live on, as does Monster Hunter on the Switch and other consoles.
Right. Which is sort of the one silver lining of this whole thing with the eShop closing is that many, many games have been ported to other places at this point, other Nintendo systems most likely.
Yeah.
In fact, as I was putting together this list or these lists, since there are several lists that we have, I was thinking I thought there would be more sort of exclusives, more fun little hidden gems on both these platforms, and in reality it was more like, oh no, this got a port. This game wasn't actually that good to begin with, so why would you play this? But it was a very different experience than what I was expecting.
Yeah, I think a lot of that Wii U stuff eventually has made its way onto the Switch. The 3DS and the DS in particular, I think, are kind of different stories, is that their kind of control scheme was so specific to those devices that a lot of that stuff has not made its way to other places. Some games get turned into mobile games and things like that, but yeah, the sort of the dual screen nature, the touch screen nature of the 3DS games and the DS games has, I think, made it especially difficult to get those experiences elsewhere. And unfortunately, it means that a lot of these games are just going to disappear when the 3DS eShop closes.
Yeah, that's the biggest bummer. It kind of concerns me also because over the last few console generations, I've made an attempt to just switch to going all digital for games so I don't have to deal with discs and a bunch of game cases cluttering up my shelves and everything. And I just kind of assumed, and this was in retrospect a poor assumption, that, I'll just, if I need a game in the future, I'll just go download it off the eShop or whatever digital storefront there is, because that'll be around forever. And so, history has shown that that's not the case.
Right.
Sony almost closed their shops for a couple of their old platforms last year until everybody whined about it. But I'm sure they're going to make another attempt when people are busier with PlayStation 6 or whatever coming out.
Right. So it's my understanding, and correct me if this is not your understanding as well, DJ, that if you've bought these games already, you will be able to continue to kind of re-download them in the future. But that is sort of at the whim of Nintendo and Sony. they may turn that function off at some point as well. And then they're, if you don't have it living on a hard drive or on a memory card somewhere, it is again lost to the ages.
Oh, I don't know if that's true. Is that the case?
I thought that was my maybe I have to do some research and issue a correction if I'm giving people bad advice. But yeah, I think that was my understanding at the very least as it relates to the 3DS eShop closure.
Oh, okay, never mind. It actually says right here you'll still be able to download, but until when? Until March 2024.
Until somebody else at Nintendo gets a bug up their butt and wants to shut it down. Yeah. So the Wii U and the 3DS eShop closes on March 27th. You will not be able to buy any new games after that point. And there's some weird kind of workarounds for getting games now, is that you can't actually use a eShop gift card to load credit to buy these games. You also can't tie a credit card to them. The only way to actually spend money in the eShop at this point is to have your 3DS and Wii U eShop tied to your Nintendo Switch account. So you put money in your Nintendo Switch bank, essentially, or tie a credit card to that, and it allows you to buy games for the 3DS and Wii U. So while those shops remain open, it's certainly not easy or intuitive or quick to be able to actually buy some of these games, which is also a bummer.
I maintain that it's easier now rather than... Remember entering your credit card information on the 3DS? That was a nightmare.
Yeah,
now I guess I load up your Switch.
It's true. I'll go with you on that. I'll give you that. But there is a step there that didn't exist in the past, but that does sort of eliminate some future steps. So good point.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive that you can't do the entire process on the 3DS, but it's like, why would you want to?
So with that in mind, DJ and I have cobbled together a list of some of the games that we feel like are must plays, are things that I think we both share a mutual fear will not be accessible to future generations or current generations, depending on how you look at it. So we wanted to make sure that we took some time before the eShop closure to kind of recommend these and get them on people's radars before everything goes dark.
Yeah. I tried to keep my list to sort of the like digital exclusives, knowing that, if you really want a copy of New Super Mario Brothers 2, you can probably just go buy a cart of it somewhere, even after the shop closes. But as I was putting together this list, I was looking at some of the prices for these things, and man, 3DS software, like the physical versions, the prices are kind of creeping up there as well. So I don't know. It just seems like it's just going to be a nightmare getting a hold of some of these titles, whether it's physical or digital.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I didn't want to turn my list into just every 3DS game that I have played. So I tried to still stick to sort of the digital shop exclusives and highlights.
Yeah, I think I took a similar approach, is that much of what I'm going to recommend is really only available in the eShop. But I also did some sort of priced shopping around to sort of see what 3DS and Wii U carts and discs were going for these days. And to your point, some of them are prohibitively expensive. To the tune of like hundreds of dollars for something like the Metroid Prime trilogy. And that's just silly when you can get it for...
Well, that one, I think that was a limited release or something.
Okay. Well, still, prohibitively expensive and probably nearly impossible to find. Who's going to give it up at this point?
Right.
Yeah.
See, I was really hoping that the digital storefronts would be an alternative to these like very limited releases that you just can't buy in a store for a reasonable price. And now they're just taking away the digital version. So just disappointment continues.
So where would you start on the 3DS, DJ? What are some of the games that made your must-have list for the 3DS?
Man, it's all over the place. One of the highlights of the 3DS to me were these quirky little, like, not really mini games, but sort of like these boutique sort of experimental games that were all released under the banner of the Guild series. So they released 2 compilations, Guild 1 and Guild 2, which had like 3 or 4 games each. And they were all designed by like notable Japanese developers. So I think it was like Yasumi Matsuno made Final Fantasy Tactics, a couple other notable developers, I think like Saito, and I forget if Yuji Naka did one of these. Suda51, I believe, was involved at some point.
Mm-hmm.
They were all these kind of like short experiences, kind of a little experimental in the gameplay department, just pretty unique at the time. And it's also something that I feel like you don't really see in Switch software. A lot of Switch software just feels like it's trying to be a little more substantial than these. So I think that this is something I'd like to see come back, but it was cool getting these on the 3DS. But I've picked out my favorites from this series because some of them were maybe a little too experimental for their own good. But I have 5 recommendations out of this series, starting with Liberation Maiden. I believe that was the Suda51 game. It's a 3D like flight shooter where you play as the teenage anime girl president of Japan. It makes sense once you start the game up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of fun. There's the Starship Dam Ray, which is a weird sort of like mystery adventure on a spaceship. There's Weapon Shop de Omase, which is a rhythm game where you play as a blacksmith who is like serving a bunch of JRPG protagonists. So they come into your shop and ask for you to craft a weapon. You have to play a rhythm game in order to accomplish that. Pretty unique. And then my two favorites out of this list are Attack of the Friday Monsters, which is, if you've heard of this series, it's like My Summer Vacation. It's a Japanese series about just kids spending time during their summer vacation. I think this is by the same creator. So again, it's the notable Japanese game creators. But it's really quite unique. It's another kind of adventure game, but you just play as a little kid who's, just wasting away the hours on their summer break in rural Japan. But it's a super fun story. Had a lot of fun with it. And then finally, one of my favorite 3DS games is Crimson Shroud by Yasumi Matsuno, the Final Fantasy Tactics creator. It's a sort of dungeon crawler, which is really reliant on you rolling a handful of virtual dice to make all your moves. But I'm a huge fan of all of his games. He rarely, it's rare for him to make a completely new game these days. I think he spends too much of his time playing Final Fantasy XIV, most likely. But this I thought was super cool. It's just it's a really quintessential Matsuno game. It's got a really kind of complex storyline, kind of obtuse game mechanics, but terrific art and soundtrack. One of my favorite Matsuno games, actually. So if I was going to recommend one game to myself to play of this entire list, and I hadn't already played this, it would be Crimson Shroud. But yeah, those are all sort of just these weird sort of short form games that I had a lot of fun with on the 3DS.
Yeah, I've not played all of those. I played quite a few of them. The two that I would recommend from my perspective is certainly Weapon Shop de Omase. I think that's a really fun kind of alternate perspective on an RPG. You're like DJ said, you're sort of the shopkeeper who's making weapons for the RPG heroes, and they turn it into a rhythm game. It has a very goofy and kind of eccentric sense of humor to it. I remember that being very fun. Mm-hmm. And Attack of the Friday Monsters is one of these cool little kind of slice of life things. Like DJ said, sort of growing up in rural Japan, but it's rural Japan in the 70s. And there's definitely kind of a kaiju monster movie kind of vibe to it. I think it's super cool. And there's not a lot of games like it. It feels very much like a, kind of personal, kind of maybe autobiographical. Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was cool. And these are all very fairly brief experiences. This is not something you're going to spend 100 hours playing. They're just cool little boutique-y video games.
Yeah. Although, if you want that true ending in Crimson Shroud, you may end up sinking a little more time into it.
Oh, really? Okay. I can't speak for that one. I didn't play that one, but yeah. Those are cool. And if I remember correctly, they're all under $10 or something, right? I think they're fairly cheap too.
They're pretty cheap, yeah. And probably, unless you really get into one of them, just a few hours long.
Excellent. Yeah, I also sort of like and kind of, I think, miss just the weirdness of some of the 3DS eShop games. I think there was stuff that kind of came out that was, a lot of the stuff I think it probably lands on Steam now or on itch, where they're kind of experimental, generally very small teams, lower budgets, and a little wacky, a little eccentric. And I think there was an era of that on the 3DS that was super notable. I think from a puzzle game perspective, there's a couple series of games that I do want to recommend that I think more or less live on the 3DS. Is the Box Boy series, I think is super fun. There's 3 of those on the 3DS. There's Box Boy, Box Boy, and Bye Bye Box Boy, which has an ominous title. I think there is one on the Switch.
Oh, it's not like the Box Boy collection or something? That was just what I assumed.
I don't believe so. I think it's a new Box Boy game.
Oh.
And the hook here is that you are you're Box Boy. You're a little 2D black lined box in a white field, and you have a family of friends that are all boxes of various shapes and sizes, and you have the ability to sort of replicate yourself, replicate a box to your left, to your right, below you. etc. And you use that to solve a series of navigation puzzles, essentially. It is a very limited rule set that they have somehow, these developers have found a way to extrapolate out into 3+ video games. They're cute, they're funny, they have, again, a very eccentric sense of humor to it, super minimalist production, but just really compelling puzzles that kind of kept me going back through the entire series. And again, this is another one where you can get all 3 of these for about $18, and totally worth having and playing on your 3DS if you're a puzzle game fan.
Yeah, I think I played the first one. It was pretty good.
Yeah. The fun sort of side story about Box Boy is that this little trilogy did get a physical release on the 3DS in Japan with an amiibo of Box Boy, which is just a white box with a smiley face on it, essentially. Yeah. Speaking of things that are prohibitively expensive, that collection is stupid expensive at this point. So unless you're an amiibo completionist and have to have the Box Boy amiibo, just grab them from the 3DS eShop.
Being an amiibo completionist sounds like a nightmare.
It's like, yeah, that's a big ask, I think. Another series that lives on the 3DS and has also jumped to the Wii U and I think is now on the Switch as well. Not all the same games, just variations on the same games, the same series, is Pushmo, Crashmo, and Stretchmo. Those 3 live on the 3DS. Similar to Box Boy, kind of minimalist presentation that takes a really brief move set and somehow turns it into compelling puzzle gameplay. By you are a cute little chibi character who pushes around squares and boxes and creates basically pixel art that you use to kind of ascend to different goals in each puzzle. You get different, abilities that sort of continue to grow and evolve over the course of the series. Pushmo and Crashmo live on the 3DS. I think Stretchmo is a Wii U game. There is no physical release for any of these that I'm aware of, so these will disappear with the eShop closure. And again, like Box Boy, you can get all of them for under $10. So those are super fun. And I think those 6 games collectively present a whole, weird little boutique-y puzzle game thing that feels very specific to the 3DS because it's so reliant on you using your touchscreen, on you having access to multiple screens. That it would be very difficult to kind of replicate that experience, I think, well on modern consoles.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so did any of the Guild series really rely on that second screen? I feel like not especially, although Weapon Shop, you did a lot of tapping as you were forging weapons, if I remember correctly. And of course, you could sort of spin the dice around in Crimson Shroud before you threw them on the tabletop, but I can imagine they could port that to something else fairly easily.
Yeah. And the last 3DS game that I want to recommend as far as sort of like quirky puzzle games go is Pocket Card Jockey, which I've talked about fairly recently. I think I talked about in 2022 on this show because I had revisited it. This was developed by Game Freak, presumably at some point between making 3 Pokemon games a year, they found a way to make this bizarro little game where you're kind of doing 2 things at once. On the top screen, it's a horse race. And on the bottom screen, you're playing solitaire. And your ability to sort of like quickly and effectively move through card decks in solitaire like gives your horse boosts to be able to run the race. Between each race, there's a whole like behind the scenes machination of you raising horses and introducing a male horse to a female horse, and they fall in love and have a baby horse, and then eventually you raise that horse and you can put him into races, and so there's this whole like generational thing to it as well. It's super bizarre and so weird. It has a ton of weird mechanics to it, but it is endlessly playable. I have fairly fond and recent memories of just sitting in bed for hours and playing Pocket Card Jockey. It's a good time, and it does not exist on any other console as far as I'm aware.
I think this was recently ported to mobile.
Oh! Well.
Or Apple Arcade, anyway.
Okay.
So there's another sort of walled garden for you to enjoy Pocket Card Jockey, but
I checked the Android, the Google Play Store. It's not there. So if it is on Apple, That's a +1 for Apple devices. Definitely play it there. But this is, excuse me, this is a super fun game that I like quite a lot, and I have played. I think played it twice in its entirety. So yeah, would definitely recommend Pocket Card Jockey. It is also like $5.
Yeah, I think I played the demo of this and it's pretty good, despite the strange premise and sort of mashup of genres.
Yeah. A couple other I guess puzzle games. I think puzzle games worked especially well on the 3DS because of the touchscreen and because of the stylus and stuff like that. Picross 3D and Picross 3D Round 2. Speaking of games that I have put lots of hours into, those are both in the eShop and both really good Picross games with a 3D component to them. The original Picross 3D, I remember I have more fond memories of than Round 2. But still quite playable and super fun. If you're hungry for Picross games, certainly the Switch does satisfy that. I feel like every other month there's a new Picross game on the Switch. But these are really, really good. You solve sort of the puzzle, and the game kind of fills in with cute colors and animates them and turns it into a piece of kind of animated pixel art. And just really well done. And again, super playable, super consumable. I just remember going from puzzle to puzzle to puzzle to puzzle. And at some point, I think you've said in the past, you had to just take it out of your 3DS and put it on a shelf so that you could actually get other games into your life.
Yeah. A lot of puzzles in each of those games. Man, I forgot there were like 7 or 8 Picross games on the 3DS that I kept seeing people mention when they're putting together their own list for the shop shutdown. And I was like, well, there are also just an unlimited number of Picross games on like the Switch or any other platform. So I don't feel like you should be in a hurry to run out and grab like Picross E5 or whatever it is. But the 3D ones are kind of an exception because they don't seem to be making new versions of those in other places.
Yeah. One of the things that occurred to me as I was sort of assembling this list is that there was a cool feature in Picross 3D where every day you could connect to the Nintendo network and download additional Picross puzzles. I'm not 100% certain that feature still works and is being serviced by Nintendo or whoever made this game. So I can't vouch for that, but that was also a cool little value added to the Picross 3D experience, is that in addition to all of the puzzles that are on the cart or in the download, you could get a bunch more, served to you every day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nice bonus.
Yeah. I also want to recommend the Professor Layton and Phoenix Wright games. There's a new Professor Layton game where you play as his daughter that's on the Switch. There is a Phoenix Wright trilogy and a brand new Phoenix Wright, well, a new Ace Attorney game anyways, that is on the Switch. But if you want to play the sort of the series progenitors in the Professor Layton world, man, there's 4 or 5 games that only live on the 3DS. And in Phoenix Wright, there's 2 Ace Attorney games that only live on the 3DS. And once the shop is shut down, those are gone. And these are really fun puzzle games. Essentially, Professor Layton is you're the professor of the title, and you stumble upon some mystery, and your ability to proceed hinges on you solving just puzzle after puzzle after puzzle being served to you by the very eccentric villagers in wherever you're trying to solve the mystery. Phoenix Wright is sort of a courtroom drama with very eccentric characters and a weirdly dark sense of humor. It's kind of a visual novel adventure game where you're collecting clues and trying to get involved in some pretty high stakes courtroom drama. It uses the microphone pretty pretty aggressively. You have to scream, "I object" or "objection" into the mic on your DS or 3DS. Yeah, those are super fun. Just, again, I think really memorable and notable characters that fortunately have some life outside of the 3DS and DS systems. But if you want to play kind of the original games in these series, those only live on the 3DS.
Well, I think Phoenix Wright trilogy has popped up on other stuff.
Yeah,
I can't speak to the quality of the ports. I know they've been it's been a little hit or miss for the various iterations. But do you know which Phoenix Wright games are exclusive on the 3DS?
That's probably a good question. I had it in my brain earlier. I don't recall now that we've jumped into this list and there's all these games we're talking about, but I know that there were 2 that have never been ported.
Hmm.
Let me do some Googling and I'll check back.
I remember most of those. I associate those as being DS games, so like predating the 3DS. So I've kind of lost track of the series since then. I was curious.
Yeah, so the two that are locked to the 3DS that have not been ported to the Switch are Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice. They are the fifth and the sixth game in the series, according to this article I'm looking at right now. Came out in 2013 and 2016, and to date are only available on the 3DS eShop. I would mention, too, that there is a very weird crossover between Phoenix Wright and Ace Attorney that came out for the 3DS as well. Currently available in the eShop. You can get the disc for it, or the cartridge for it, at retail if you can find it for under $100. But that is a very cool game that really kind of steers you into the strengths of both series, somehow under the guise of them collaborating on a case. It's really cool, and just a very odd and unusual thing. But would recommend that as well.
Oh, I thought people didn't like that one. That one's actually okay.
Yeah, it's fun. It's not the best of either of those series by any means, but it's just really cool to get the two of those games somehow under the same hood together.
Yeah, that always that is notable, at least.
Yeah. So that is my my advertisement for Phoenix Wright and Professor Layton.
Nice.
Yeah.
I want to give a mention to 3DS saw a lot of sort of like retro games refit using the new 3D screen. So if you're into that, there are a bunch of, I think, Nintendo 3D classics. But most notable to me are these series of Sega games that got sort of 3D updates. And there's a whole bunch of these just for a few dollars each on the eShop with a bunch of headliners like you'd expect, like Altered Beast. There's Afterburner 2. I think you get both Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2. You can add yet another copy of Gunstar Heroes to your library, because that's been ported to just about everything. But the ones I had the most fun with on the 3DS were 3D Streets of Rage 2, mainly because I had never really spent a lot of time with a Streets of Rage game. It's kind of a side-scrolling brawler. Still holds up pretty well. But then my favorite out of all of these was 3D Outrun, which I had never spent a lot of time with outside of arcades. And man, you really like just playing this in an arcade is probably not enough time to really master this game unless you're just living in the arcade. But I thought it was a pretty good port. Really, pretty good use of the 3D. I'm not even a huge fan of the 3D on the 3DS, but I thought it was used effectively in this. And they added a bunch of just goofy options to make it feel like you were playing it in one of the like elaborate arcade cabinets, which I think had the whole I forgot if you actually sat down in like a car seat for this, or if it just had the pedals that you would press with your feet. But it had options for like when you hit the accelerator button on your 3DS, it would kind of make the thunk sound as if you would hit your, like you were actually pressing down on your foot or like shifting the or moving the shifter or whatever.
Oh, I thought it was you banging your knee inside the cabinet, but yeah.
Oh, well, whatever it reminds you of.
Sure.
But just sort of a fun little additional touch to this version. And I'm pretty sure you can turn those off if that's not essential to your Outrun experience. But yeah, just a bunch of little fun sort of bite-sized arcade games that you can turn the 3D on if you feel like.
Yeah. There were 3D classics for some old Nintendo games too, some NES games that I remember playing. I know I played Excite Bike, I played Kid Icarus, like the original Kid Icarus, and Kirby's Adventure were all available as 3D classics. So it was the original NES games with kind of updated 3D graphics that you could play with the 3D slider on. And it was kind of a fun way to revisit some old games, just kind of polished up for the new system.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the list now. There were others, Twinbee, which I've never heard of, and Urban Champion and Xevious.
Xevious, yeah.
Also came out for Nintendo 3D Classics, but I can't vouch for those. But Excite Bike, Kid Icarus, and Kirby's Adventure are the only way that I've actually played those games before. So it's cool that those, had an opportunity to get updated to a 3D Classic.
Yeah. Fortunately, these have seen ports since then. Like there have been tons of Sega Classics collections I'm pretty sure you can get Outrun and all those games I mentioned on the Switch at this point, but they're not in 3D. So if that is really something that you're interested in, check them out on your 3DS. I don't know if the Switch version makes the arcade cabinet sounds either, but again, not sure if that's essential to the Outrun experience.
Yeah. Man, this list of Sega 3D classics is much longer, like 6 times longer than the Nintendo one. So Sega really kind of embraced this thing.
Yeah.
Excellent. Because I had a couple of other games that I wanted to recommend too that were, let's go back to this one because it sort of fits in nicely with the previous puzzle games that I recommended. There's a DSiWare game. I just had to sort of explain what DSi is. At one point, the Nintendo DS came out, and there was no eShop, there was no ability to download games off the internet, and then Nintendo kind of created this thing, this DSiWare. That was an online shop where you could download, little kind of experimental games. I don't remember a ton of them, honestly, and I don't remember spending a ton of money on them. This was an early world where, buying games on the internet was not a normal thing. But one of the DSiWare games is SteamWorld Tower Defense. And obviously the Image and Form, the folks have made all of the SteamWorld games. SteamWorld Dig and Dig 2 are probably the most famous. The SteamWorld Tower Defense was the first in that entire series. It was basically them kind of formulating what a SteamWorld game would look like and how it would play. Tower defense games were all the rage once upon a time. There was a lot of them.
You can tell this came out in whatever, like 2004 or 5 or something.
At the height of the SteamWorld rage, or the tower defense rage. So it's a tower defense game. It's a pretty good one. It's kind of very playable and fun, with what you would expect from a SteamWorld game. So it's sort of a cowboy robot mashup. It's cool. It is also under $5. So you can get a lot of game for very little money for some of these. If you want to see where the SteamWorld series, the SteamWorld interconnected universe, or whatever they're referring to it as, kind of began, you can check out this weird little DSiWare game on the 3DS.
Nice.
Yeah. I have some games that I want to sort of shout out for the 3DS that are available at retail that you could go into, a retro video game shop or on the internet and probably try to find a copy of the cartridge somewhere. But in my quick search before we started, prices can be a little crazy. So I want to recommend Radiant Historia, Perfect Chronology. Radiant Historia was a DS game that got updated to a 3DS game. You could probably find a copy of the original DS game somewhere out there, probably for even more money. No, I won't sell you mine. But Perfect Chronology is the updated version, an expanded version of that for the 3DS. It's a really cool kind of JRPG with a time travel, alternate timeline, time loop hook to it. It's really good. It's not one of these 100-hour things. You can get through it in a fairly reasonable amount of adult playtime. It has really good characters, a really cool story. It really plays up the time travel, time loop hook in a really creative way. The Perfect Chronology edition adds alternate places on the timeline that you can stop and some additional sort of side stories that you can do. So it's a more expanded version of the game. But it is maybe one of my favorite RPGs of all time. Certainly one of my favorites on the 3DS. It's a shame that it's never made its way to the Switch or any other device that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So we definitely recommend checking out Radiant Historia, Perfect Chronology.
Pretty notable that they made an enhanced version of this DS game for the 3DS. It's weird that you don't think of it the 3DS as a system that gets a bunch of remasters, but in this case it did.
Yeah. It's much more notable, obviously, that like Wii U games have gone on to be Switch games. But yeah, that jump from DS to 3DS. Most of those DS carts worked. You could just put it in your 3DS and they work. So there probably was not a ton of incentive to spend money to update something that was functioning just fine. I think the original Radiant Historia was a pretty small release, was enjoyed, but didn't sell a bajillion copies maybe. And this was a unique opportunity to kind of like, clean it up a little bit, repackage it, and maybe get it some attention it didn't get the first time it came out. It was a very weird creative choice made with the Perfect Chronology version of this game, and that they changed all the character art. It was really good in the original. I was quite fond of it. And they replaced it with pretty generic and kind of bland looking anime characters. I don't love it. There is a function in the game where you can spend $5 to download the original art. And it kind of pastes it over the characters in the game for you. I think that's $5 well spent. Your mileage may vary on that, but I would recommend, if you get Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology, which is available in the eShop, also spend the additional $5 to download the classic character art.
Yeah, that's hysterical, because you won't be able to do that after the eShop closes. You'll be stuck with the new art.
Yeah, you're stuck with the ugly anime characters. So
that's so weird.
It would be a shame if that was your entire experience with Radiant Historia. But it's a very cool game, a super creative RPG that does some really unique things that I've not seen other RPGs do. So we definitely recommend it.
Nice. Yeah, that's still on my list to play one of these days.
I
have a bunch of weird eShop exclusives before I get onto stuff that is just, widely known 3DS games that I recommend. But I'm going to start with God of Protectors, which recently received a sequel on the Switch, but I think it still plays very well on the 3DS. It's kind of like, it's a little bit of tower defense and kind of like a horde mode game where a bunch of monsters are slowly approaching your base. So you need to set up defenses and go out and fight them. Designed by, I think, Ancient Software and, the Yuzo Koshiro's group. So, as you might expect, there's an awesome FM Synthesis music DLC pack that you can get and listen to while you're playing this, which, first you have to download the game before the shop closes, but you also have to get this special music add-on, which I think is definitely worthwhile. I'm a huge fan of the Rhythm Heaven series, and they released this sort of weird compilation / sequel for the 3DS called Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix. Interesting place to get a lot of previous Rhythm Heaven mini games all in one place, which are all sort of just these very whimsical, sort of like rhythm-based mini games. It's not really consistent throughout every single game like you would get in a Guitar Hero or something like that, where you're just playing the same sort of gameplay style to a bunch of different tracks, but you're always doing something a little different in time with the beat. Pretty unique. And I think they have not released a new Rhythm Heaven since this version. And prior to this, the pre-existing Rhythm Heaven games, it's been quite a while, so maybe you haven't tried a Rhythm Heaven game. In that case, I highly recommend checking this out. And let's see, a couple of games that maybe were not the best, but still notable in that they are 3DS eShop exclusives. Chibi Robo Photo Finders was this game. I don't know if you're familiar with Chibi Robo, but you would use the camera. Of course, yeah. Why would I even ask?
I have the Chibi Robo amiibo because it came with a Chibi Robo like 3D platformer game for the 3DS. So
okay.
I suspect that has not been made available on other consoles either. So
probably not. I think Nintendo wants as little to do with Chibi Robo as possible at this point.
Yeah, there seemed to be sort of a brief period where they were like, "What about this? What about this?" And I don't know if any of it landed with anybody.
I think I forget if it was for that 3D platformer, but they were like, "Well, if this doesn't do well, there probably won't be any more Chibi Robo games," and then nobody bought it. So,
and there has not been since.
Yeah, rip Chibi Robo. But anyway, this is another just weird experimental game where you would kind of do the typical, a little bit of the Chibi Robo traditional gameplay where he's cleaning up, he's doing chores in his environment, but occasionally in this you have to go out and take pictures of objects with the 3DS camera, which I thought was a super fun premise. Did not work especially well on account of the 3DS camera being really just terrible, but still, what a fun concept. I really wish this had done better. Then speaking of this now, I think it's just well, no wonder they didn't make any more of these. but just a weird oddity. If you're into collecting just strange games like that, maybe worthwhile.
Yeah.
Speaking of strange games, there was this one called Kokuga, which was designed by Hiroshi Iuchi, who did Ikaruga, which is a notable sort of like 2D shooter. Another sort of like game developer who's not super prolific, so it's interesting to see another game from him come out. Didn't love it, but it's notable just because Hiroshi Yuji made it, so that could be worth checking out as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this one is actually delisted in Europe. It's like a few of these games, was going through this list, I was like, oh, you can't even buy this anymore. It's like it escaped the eShop early, but I believe this is still available in North America if you like to check out sort of an experimental top-down shooter. And then there's this game called Chase Cold Case Investigations, which was developed by members of the team that did Hotel Dusk and Last Window. Very much in the same style of those games. So sort of a detective visual novel. Not as good as either of those, I don't think. But if you're, sort of itching for a new Hotel Dusk-like experience, it's I think it's worth your time, just a few hours long. This really felt like they were setting up to produce a whole like new series of these things starring this new cast of characters working in this Japanese detective agency. But I believe this is the only one they ended up putting out, so because it just didn't find the audience that they were hoping for.
Oh.
So too bad, but you can still play it until the end of March. Cool. And then I had a bunch of like a couple of really random recommendations. Like if you have either of the Monster Hunter games for 3DS, Monster Hunter 3 and I think 3, 4 and Monster Hunter Generations, there were these save data tools. So you could either transfer your save data to the Wii U version of Monster Hunter 3, or you could transfer it to actually the Switch version of Monster Hunter Generations.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Liberate your save file from the 3DS after you throw that thing in the garbage after the shop closes. You can play on your Switch, but you need that app on the 3DS eShop if you have save data there. And also, I think just the 3DS save data transfer tool in general, like if you ever need to migrate your data to a new 3DS, not sure how common this is going to be for people, but you need to have that tool downloaded from the eShop in order to do that.
Oh, that's a good call.
I think that's true. Like, how is that possible? Shouldn't you just be able to do it without downloading something extra? I don't know what Nintendo's thinking, but Somebody recommended this to me, like, get that transfer tool.
My memory of transferring, because I was a sucker, and every time they put out a new version of the DS or the 3DS, I bought one for the most part. And yeah, the only way to get your stuff from one DS or 3DS to the next one required you copying files to your computer. And then putting them in a memory card and then blah, blah, blah. But there was something you had to do where you had to put I think particularly with the 3DS, you had to put your two 3DSs near each other, connected to the same network. And I remember the animation of little Pikmin carrying mystery boxes from screen to screen. So they were doing some data transfer between the two, but the only way to get your saves was to do it physically by saving them to your PC and then moving that memory card into the new device. Yeah, it would be a bummer if that went away with the closure of the eShop, the function to do so. My thought being, man, I have so much stuff like living on my 3DS that I will lose access to if I don't have the ability to, if my device dies. So yeah, it would be good to have that tool living somewhere if I need it.
Just looking at this list again, that doesn't seem like it should be an additional download. So I'm questioning it a little bit. I think I pulled that from somebody else's list, actually. I don't know how many people are realistically going to like migrate to a new 3DS in the year 2023, but who knows? Hopefully I never had to do that because, that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah.
It was scary every time because like I never wanted to lose my stuff. I didn't want to lose my Animal Crossing islands, etc. So it was always sort of like, please work, please. And yeah. It was a little dicey and surprisingly complex. I remember having like a wiki open with like the step-by-steps and all these things that you had to do. And the point of no return, you could lose everything if you screwed something up from that point forward. Nintendo just was not good at transitioning from device to device or generation to generation sometimes.
Most
of the time. Yeah. I would also sort of recommend the Rhythm Heaven games. Those are a lot of fun. Rhythm Heaven Fever is the one on the Wii that I played quite a bit. But the Megamix on the 3DS, I think, includes a lot of the puzzles and a lot of the games from Fever. Right? Isn't it sort of like Megamix is like a greatest hits, right?
Yeah, it pulls from all three Rhythm Heaven games, which is interesting for several reasons. So the first one only came out in Japan, so maybe you'll be playing some of those games for the first time. And the second and third were on the DS and the Wii, respectively, like you said, which both had very unusual control schemes. So I think in some cases you get to play these with the button controls for the first time.
Cool.
But still a lot of fun. Still definitely worth checking out if you like rhythm games in any capacity.
Yeah, I always sort of felt like they lived in that weird kind of WarioWare kind of gray space, and whatever sort of the structure of a WarioWare game is, where it sort of like serves a bunch of like rapid fire little challenges to you. Rhythm Heaven sort of does that as well, but they're all kind of rhythm based. And yeah, it gets quite maddening and super fun. And I remember having a lot of hours of enjoyment from the one on the Wii, sitting on my couch and playing with motion controls and all the other stuff. And yeah, I kind of forgot that it lived on the 3DS as well. I'll have to put that back on my list too.
Yeah. It's actually the same art director / character designer who worked on WarioWare. So
incidentally, there you go.
The art style may be a little familiar.
Cool. Yeah. Some good calls. My list is growing now. I have to buy these games.
Yeah.
So there's some like I mentioned before, some 3DS retail games I do want to recommend that are just crazy expensive to buy in the real world, but you can get on the eShop. So Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is essentially Luigi's Mansion 2. It's really good. It's probably the best Luigi's Mansion game. It looks amazing on the 3DS. Nothing is lost. It's a pretty expansive game as well. It goes on for quite a bit. You have a giant multi-floored mansion that Luigi is working his way through. And there's a neighborhood, like a cul-de-sac of other creepy mansions, each having their own kind of theme. That Luigi is essentially being a Ghostbuster and trying to purge of all of their evil spirits.
Is this the one where he's in a hotel, or is that the third one?
That's the third one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on the Switch. That's really good too. Would recommend. But Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is one of the three. Well, they eventually re-released the first Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS as well. But Dark Moon, I think, is the superior of the collection.
You're just like, don't play that one.
I mean, it's good. Yeah, it's fun to see sort of where it started. It feels very much like a GameCube game ported to the 3DS. So, you know, but Dark Moon was made to be a 3DS game. It looks and plays really, really well. It has, and I'm not sure if this still functions, so don't quote me on this. It has a really fun multiplayer component to it as well, that I put a lot of hours into. So Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is a really good buy that you can get from the eShop that I would recommend.
Nice.
And it's more Luigi. Luigi's a lot of fun. He doesn't get the limelight very often, so it's fun to hang out with him when he's the lead.
Yeah.
There's 2 Legend of Zelda games on the 3DS that I would recommend as well. Ocarina of Time is the 3D update of was it a Nintendo 64 game?
Yeah.
And I never played it on the Nintendo 64. I've only played it on the 3DS. And it's awesome. It's a really good Legend of Zelda game. It plays very well on the 3DS, and it takes advantage of the second screen for managing your inventory in a way that I can't even imagine working on the Nintendo 64.
I was going to say, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see, I think this and also Majora's Mask are on the Switch Online thing, if you have that expansion pack.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, the inventory stuff, I mean, it's worth having this version just, I assume, so you can switch your boots on and off in the water temple.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Which on the 3DS just requires you tapping on the icon on your inventory on the bottom screen. But on the Nintendo 64 and presumably on the Switch, you have to pause, go into your inventory change your boots, and then unpause and go back to the game. Yeah. Probably not a deal breaker if you're trying to experience Ocarina of Time for the first time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you really want that authentic sort of Water Temple PTSD experience that everybody got to enjoy back in the N64, maybe play it that way. But
sure,
20 years later, give me that second screen.
So yeah, if you're looking for like an improved quality of life experience on the 3DS, would recommend Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Also on the 3DS is the Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, and A Link to the Past. If I remember correctly, A Link Between Worlds is a sequel to A Link to the Past.
Yeah,
is that accurate,
sort
DJ?
of a pseudo sequel. I guess more of a sequel than any of the other Zelda games are like direct sequels to one another.
Right.
But yeah, based very heavily on Link to the Past.
Yeah, and A Link Between Worlds is similar in structure in that you've got kind of portals to an alternate version of Hyrule that you bounce back and forth between. It has all the classic sort of Legend of Zelda dungeoneering and all that other fun stuff with all the cool tools that you would expect. With kind of that top-down, slightly askew isometric view that works really, really well on the 3DS. And yeah, all really, really good games. I think just kind of legendary Legend of Zelda experiences that will not be lost forever when the 3DS eShop closes. But if you're trying to get them at a reasonable price, this is a good way to do it.
Yeah. Similarly, I have Bravely Default and Dragon Quest VII on my list, which receive physical releases, but I have no idea how much those are going to cost at this point. If you wanted to buy them retail, I imagine Dragon Quest VII is unobtainable. But both really good. Dragon Quest VII is a really good port of my favorite Dragon Quest game. It's like 5,000 hours long, so it's pretty substantial. Bravely Default is a really fun take on sort of a turn-based Final Fantasy game. It is more or less like one of the older Final Fantasy games, but all the names are different. It's sort of forging it's like a new path for that sort of genre, but had a lot of fun with that one. There's also a sequel, which takes us into sort of my 3DS list of shame, just games I have not gone around to playing. So there's Bravely Second, which is the confusingly named sequel to Bravely Default. Ever Oasis, which I believe was developed by, I can't remember his name, but it was another notable JRPG developer. I don't know if that was especially well received, but sort of along the same lines as Kokuga. I'm like, oh, this guy made it. Maybe it's worth checking out, even if it's not the greatest game in the world.
Yeah, I've not played the Bravely games. I've played some Dragon Quest, obviously, games. I'm interested to hear that Dragon Quest VII is your favorite Dragon Quest game. I don't know if I recall you going on record with that in the past. That's interesting. Yeah, the Dragon Quest VII is going for a lot of money on the internet right now. I just did a quick search while you were talking. So definitely the eShop is the way to go unless you're trying to invest heavily in physical cartridges right now. But Ever Oasis I played, I think that fits kind of nicely into what has become kind of the cozy game genre. It has elements of like town building and planting and farming and harvesting and stuff to it. So yeah, that's a cute game. I don't think I finished it. I think maybe I sort of grew a little tired of the experience, but it is interesting that it has the pedigree that you said. Yeah.
So was this like a juice bar or something?
I don't remember that. You stumped me on that.
Yeah. I thought there was like a smoothie station at some point. I was like, oh, that's weird. Because you're in a desert, right? But
yes. Yeah, that's the Oasis part, yeah.
I still like to check that out. What else is on my list? Everybody keeps telling me, for the last 10 years, they've been telling me to play Fire Emblem Awakening, so I'll probably do that. And then Kirby's Epic Yarn. Is that good? This was like a Wii game, right? But it got ported?
Correct. Yep.
Do I need to play that?
It's good. It's a cute and fun Kirby game. Yeah, I would recommend it. It's
okay. Well,
yeah.
Well, maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah. It is not my favorite Kirby.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But that would probably go to Kirby Planet Robobot, which is a 3DS game.
Oh, that's also a 3DS game.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot of fun. That's a 2D platformer with Kirby in it. And you build mech suits, essentially, that Kirby lives and which sounds like the weirdest combination of things ever, but it's done in a particularly Kirby way that's super fun. So if you ever wanted to see Kirby's weird round body jammed into the pilot seat of a mech shooting at aliens, then Planet Robobot is the Kirby game for you.
That one I think is well regarded. So yeah, I'll put that on my list.
I think that like Ever Oasis, I think we're like later in the 3DS's life. So benefit obviously from years of experience with programming for that device, but maybe got overlooked as people were kind of moving on to other consoles at the time. So I think those are good recommendations for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On a related, I would mention Fantasy Life, which I think I like more than you, DJ.
Oh yeah. I would recommend people just pick up that Final Fantasy 14 free trial and get started on that, because that's what I was doing when I should have been playing Fantasy Life.
Oh really? That's a cool kind of open world adventure game where you occupy different jobs in kind of a fantasy RPG. You can be, you got blacksmith or a seamstress or what are some of the other things you could be in there? A potion maker, things like that. And they have a series.
I can just tell you could be a carpenter, blacksmith, armor, alchemist, weaver, leatherworker, because they're literally the same professions that you can be in Final Fantasy 14.
Oh, okay. There you go. DJ is probably better qualified to talk about this than I am. So, but it's a lot of fun. It turns all of those into a little rhythm game. It has a fun little world with dragons and knights and things like that you can kind of explore and solve mysteries. I enjoyed it. I played it quite a bit. I did a couple of the different lives and owned all of the different jobs and leveled them all up and played all the mini games that went with them. This was a game after I had kind of grown tired of Animal Crossing New Leaf, that people were like, oh, it kind of pushes a lot of the same buttons as Animal Crossing, is that, you have villagers and you get to know your neighbors and they all have a lot of really kind of fun personalities. And you get to do, chores essentially. So I had a lot of fun with Fantasy Life. Was always sad that, I think they made another Fantasy Life game that was a mobile only. And I don't think that ever came out in the US. I think it was Japan only.
I think it was just a port, but it was confusingly called Fantasy Life 2.
Oh, okay. That is confusing.
I could be mistaken. It's really confusing, right? Like, don't do that.
But yeah, so Fantasy Life I enjoyed, and I think again sort of fits nicely into that category of like farming sims and cozy games and wholesome games.
Yeah, I think I would have enjoyed this much better if it had come out like a several years earlier, because I know it took them a long time to bring over here.
Yeah,
but when it finally did release, there were a few too many parallels between this and Final Fantasy for me to really enjoy this as much as I should have. Also, there was just way too much dialogue, but maybe that is okay for other people.
It is a very talkative game. Yes, I do recall that. Yeah.
Everybody just can't believe there's a talking butterfly and they have to just go on about it for 5 minutes every time.
I'm having flashbacks to Fantasy Life now. Thank you. The last recommendation I think I have here on my list for 3DS games is Shin Megami Tensei 4 and Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, which is, again, the confusingly titled sequel to Shin Megami Tensei 4. You would think it would just be 5, but it's not.
So is it not like related to 4 in some way?
They are connected. Yeah, they are pretty interconnected. So Shin Megami Tensei 4 takes place in feudal times, if I remember correctly, and Apocalypse sort of fast forwards and takes you to post-apocalyptic Japan. But there are stories and elements that are connected between the two. They are very, very long JRPGs, and are sort of a good prototype for how future generations of Shin Megami Tensei and Persona games have been approached. But they're really, really good, and I believe are only playable on the 3DS. These got retail, these got retail releases, but are probably difficult to find at this point. So would recommend grabbing from the eShop if you're trying to, if you, like a lot of folks, probably discovered Shin Megami Tensei or Persona recently through the re-release of some of those games, I would recommend going back to the 3DS and getting a couple of these older ones as well. If you have hundreds of hours.
Should I play one of these? Should I put this on my FOMO list? I feel like these always gave me the impression where it was like, all right, I'm gonna, lock myself in my room all weekend and just play, just grind out this incredibly old school style RPG.
Yeah.
Which on some level is appealing to me. But should I put this on my list? I'll think about it.
They're good. I played a lot of 4, and not as much of 4 Apocalypse. But when it first came out for the 3DS, I spent quite a bit of time with Shin Megami Tensei 4. Again, they're so dense and they're so huge. It's hundreds of hours of gameplay, so you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Obviously, if time is a factor, I would recommend at this point probably just getting on board with Persona 3, 4, and 5, which are now available on everything.
Yeah.
But again, if you're a completionist and want to see where that series started, essentially, roll back to Shin Megami Tensei on the 3DS.
Nice.
Yeah, and clear your schedule. Maybe take a week off from work.
Yeah. All right, I think wrapping up my 3DS list, I'd be remiss if I did not mention Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, which is another just weird experimental 3DS game where it was essentially a minigame collection, and it was like a collection of Nintendo sports minigames. So in general, they're all pretty good. But the hook with this one is that there was this cartoon dog, Rusty, I believe, who would try and sell you these mini games, and you would have to like haggle with him to drop the price down. Or I mean, like, you had the option too. You could just buy everything at full price if you wanted. But you would like then pay real money for the mini game. So you were like actually haggling with this dog. It was a bizarre experience. And it's like, you're not gonna, he's not asking for hundreds of dollars for these things. It's kind of typical eShop level stuff.
But real currency, like genuine American dollars. Yeah.
Real currency, yeah. Like some people ended up spending more money on this game than other people. It's just like conceptually just bizarre. And at the end of the day, you're just playing like baseball mini games, which is like whatever.
This reminds me of the what was the Badge Arcade? Was that a?
Oh yeah, no, I love Badge Arcade.
And that was a bunch of like, they were like slot machines, like, or claw machines, essentially.
Yeah.
And and you would get little capsules that would crack open and would give you icons that you could use to decorate your home screen on your 3DS. Classic
super
Nintendo sprites and things like that you could basically build Mario levels and other fun stuff right on your home screen. But that was free to play, but you had to pay, again, real money to get polls on the machine. So it was Nintendo's sort of approach to a gacha game, I think, in a lot of ways, and microtransactions, which was really unusual on the 3DS.
Yeah, man, I forgot about Badge Arcade. Badge Arcade was so fun. I spent a lot. I bought a lot of tokens for.
Yeah, I think I did too.
I think, but man, you should see my home screen. It looks great. Man, I think you can still play that. I think they stopped releasing new updates for it.
Correct.
And also there was some, like, the thing I didn't like about it is that each set of stickers would like rotate in and out of the store. So I don't know how they handle that after they stopped releasing new updates, whether it's still just a limited selection. Because that was kind of a bummer. That was always like, oh, I need to buy 30 more tokens before all these stickers go away. Kind of not great. But another just weird sort of like experimental app that Nintendo came up with.
Well, and kind of a fun way for Nintendo to mine all of the cool characters and licenses that they own, obviously, because it was this thing where like, hey, for this week we're doing Metroid icons. Next week we're doing Animal Crossing ones. You've only got a limited time. Make sure you get them all out of the claw machine. And like you, I think I probably spent more money than I should have on tokens to try to get all the Animal Crossing ones.
Yeah, I forget what the big week was for me. I think it was like they did a Super Mario Brothers 2 collection with a bunch of sprites from that game, and I was like, oh, I gotta buy a lot of tokens this week because I need a lot of these things.
Yep.
I would love to see that come back on the Switch. I don't know if it makes sense, but man, what just a fun little novelty.
Yeah, I would love anything on my Switch that lets me junk up the home screen. I think that it's the black or white are my options now, I think. and the 3DS, man, there were just so many cool options for wallpapers and backgrounds and things like that you could do to customize and really kind of make it feel like your own generally pretty ugly collection of games.
Yeah. All right, does that wrap up the 3DS list? Should we move on to the second hour of the show for Wii U stuff?
I suspect this one will be much briefer. Yeah, I think like we mentioned at the beginning, like a lot of the good Wii U stuff has made its way to the Switch. But DJ and I were able to mine for some pretty good recommendations that don't appear to be available elsewhere.
Yeah, this is actually super quick. Give a shout out to Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, which is a follow-up to Kirby, what was it called? Kirby Canvas Curse on the
Canvas
DS.
Curse, yeah.
One of my favorite DS games. I was surprised to see this did not get ported, but it also makes sense because it really relied on having that Wii U tablet as an input device. But it's a very like minimalist Kirby game where you draw paths for him to roll around on the screen using the tablet. Thought it was a lot of fun. Definitely an unusual Kirby experience, and like I mentioned, it's just weird control setup, so I can see why it hasn't been ported. And I don't think they've ported the Wind Waker HD update for the Wii, although I constantly see rumors that and I think Twilight Princess are going to get updated, but who knows how reliable those rumors are.
Yeah. Wind Waker HD is a very easy recommendation for me. It's the game that when it came to the Wii U got me to buy a Wii U.
Oh.
I wasn't on board initially. I didn't get one at launch. Quite a while later, I think it was 9 or 10 months later, they put out the Wind Waker HD edition, which had a tablet that had cool Zelda art decorating the front of it, and came with a copy of Wind Waker HD. I was in at that point. That was my big purchase. And yeah, Zelda games are hard to replay because there tend to be pretty significant time crunch experiences. But I have played Wind Waker in its entirety all the way through twice because I played it on the GameCube and then I played the Wind Waker HD version beginning to end all the way through. And man, I love that game. It's still, as much as I love Breath of the Wild, Wind Waker is the game that got me into Zelda games. And I still think it's probably one of the best.
Plus, I think they updated that so it sort of alleviates the TDM of some of those sailing sequences, if I remember correctly. Like they give you a special sail for your boat.
That allows you to speed those up, yeah, so you don't spend quite as much time on the open water, yeah.
Yeah, so it makes that second playthrough a little easier.
It's true. I didn't think of it that way, but that's a good point, yeah. Although I like that stuff. I think being out on the open sea was a lot of fun, and particularly once you got the ability to mine stuff off the ocean floor with the big. Speaking of what you call it, arm games, you could find a little glowy bit in the ocean and navigate your ship over to it and use the robot arm on your ship to go down and look for treasure chests at the bottom of the sea. And if you were fast forwarding, you don't get to do that stuff. I think that's fun.
Yeah. So that's it. My two Wii U recommendations. And which brings me to my list of shame with stuff that I am planning to pick up because I would still like to play at some point. There were these two sort of mini game collections called NES Remix 1 and 2 for the Wii U. Just sort of weird mashups, or not really mashups, but like distortions of old Nintendo games. Like I think there was its take on Super Mario Brothers was you would run one of the levels from right to left rather than doing it normally. Always felt like kind of an oddity, so I would like to check these out.
Yeah, that also has kind of that WarioWare vibe to it, where you're doing
a little bit, yeah,
little chunks of different classic NES games, kind of in succession.
Yeah. Star Fox Zero, is this good? I don't know if this is good or not, but I've always just been kind of curious about it. It was like I think somewhat of a remake of the original Star Fox or Star Fox 64. I feel like it's just one of those games where I have to see for myself like what the deal is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's terrible. Well, I guess we'll find out. And then finally, Xenoblade Chronicles X. At some point, I will play a Xenoblade game, but I hear this one is one of the best ones. So I'm going to check this out. But when I was searching through all these lists of other people's recommendations, there's an interesting note about this where if you own the physical edition of Xenoblade Chronicles X, you can actually download these like data packs from the eShop, which improve load times on it because apparently those are not very good. And that you will lose the ability to do that once the eShop goes away.
Oh.
So that's strange.
Yeah.
But I also discovered that if you just download the whole thing from the eShop to begin with, that includes the data packs. So just an even more niche sort of footnote on this.
Better get on that. Yeah, the clock is ticking.
So anyway, yeah, not as many Wii U recommendations. I suppose I could give a shout out to Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, because I don't think that's anywhere else. It's only on 3DS and Wii U. But that's a very good Monster Hunter game. As I said, it sort of justified the entire existence of the Wii U to me. So that definitely puts me in a smaller segment of the population in terms of people's opinions on the Wii U. But yeah, if you're into sort of retro Monster Hunter at this point, definitely worth checking that out.
Cool. I have a couple of Wii U recommendations as well from the Wii U eShop. One is an indie game called Affordable Space Adventures. This is a cool little Wii U oddity that, again, I think is very sort of specifically tuned to the Wii U experience, in that you control a little spaceship on your big TV. You have a spaceship navigating through canyons and stuff like that. And on the console in front of you, on the handheld, you're managing all of the functions on your ship. You're keeping the reactor going so that everything has power. You're keeping the lights on. You're piloting and steering. You're feeding the reactor so that everything continues to stay powered up. You're diverting power if you have to go through different challenges and types of terrain. You have to turn off shields to be able to do. So you basically have a console in front of you of all the things that it would take to operate a spaceship. And you're managing all of that on the tablet while trying to navigate your little spaceship through, horrible challenges on the screen ahead of you. So it's a very cool game. It really sort of relies on you having two screens available to you to be able to play. And to the best of my knowledge, that game, Affordable Space Adventures, has never come out for another console. And will be lost to the ages once the Wii U eShop closes. Zombie U is a cool game to recommend on the Wii U. This has since been ported to other consoles as just Zombie, Zombi. But the original version of this, the original experience of this, came out for the Wii U. It was kind of a roguelike, with you trying to survive a zombie apocalypse, essentially. You would see how many days and how far you could get away from your home base before eventually being eaten by zombies. And then kind of lather, rinse, repeat that experience over and over again, eventually getting to the point where you previously died and finding your previous character's backpack and all of the fun stuff in it that you could use to help, afford your survival for a little bit longer. Just a very cool, again, kind of experimental game that really relied on having two screens available to you. And did get a physical release, but I think probably is prohibitively expensive at this point. So would recommend checking out Zombie U on the Wii U.
Wow. Yeah, this was like one of the headlining sort of Wii U launch games, right? It was like one of the few games that like you would see and go, oh, I understand why there's this tablet thing that's attached to this console now.
Yeah, this is, I think it was Ubisoft getting very much on board with the launch of the Wii U after probably making $1 bajillion on the Wii and really trying to get Nintendo out of the gate with their cool new device. Ubisoft was there on day one with the U, presumably, and Zombie. Zombie U stands for Ubisoft and Wii U. At least that's how I always thought of it. I do want to recommend, too, as far as sort of like Legend of Zelda games go, there are 2 Legend of Zelda games that came out for the DS called Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass that are really good and noteworthy in their own way. Phantom Hourglass, I think, is the stronger of the two, but Spirit Tracks is noteworthy because it's essentially Wind Waker, but you have a train instead of a boat. And you're using the touchscreen to sort of lay tracks that your train can navigate on across Hyrule to sort of, do the things that Link does. These are not available, unfortunately, in the 3DS eShop to play on your 3DS, but you can get them on the Wii U's Virtual Console and play them on your Wii U. So they're DS games that you're playing on your Wii U tablet. I guess you can blow them up to the TV screen as well, but I'm not sure how good that would look.
Yeah. Well, is it like you get one screen on the TV and the other's on the tablet, or is it both on the TV?
I don't remember. I'm not sure, actually. I would have to go back and poke at it again. But yeah, so these are just cool, kind of experimental, smaller Legend of Zelda experiences, with all of the, the hooks of a classic Legend of Zelda experience that you would want as far as dungeon crawling and stuff goes, but are more or less lost to the ages, again, like some of the other games on this list, and locked away on physical cartridges for the DS. If you want to play them, if you want to download them and have access to them, you can get them on your Wii U in the Virtual Console. And yeah, would recommend doing that before they shut that thing down.
Nice.
Yeah. And certainly last but not least, the Metroid Prime trilogy. I think like Wind Waker has been rumored to come to the Switch forever. Mm-hmm. I keep hearing that there's like, it's done, it's waiting, presumably waiting for Metroid Prime 4 to come out. Like this would be the teaser for that. But yeah, if you want to play the original Metroid Prime games, the first person shooter games, essentially, you can get those in the Wii U eShop pretty cheaply. If you want to find it on a disc, it will cost you a small fortune. Yeah. So if you want to have access to these Metroid Prime games before they ever hit the Switch, get them from the eShop.
Plus notable because you can replay Metroid Prime 1 and 2 with motion controls, or the Wiimote pointer controls, which I did, or at least for Metroid Prime 1. And with a little calibration, it's actually not bad.
Yeah.
It's no Resident Evil 4, but I still managed to get through that game, which is, not the easiest game to get through.
Yeah. So what was if I remember the lineage of this correctly, Metroid Prime 1 and 2 were Wii games, and Metroid Prime...
They were both GameCube, and then Metroid Prime 3 was on the Wii with...
Gotcha.
I still have not played Metroid Prime 3, but people generally speak highly of the motion integration in that game. I could just be completely misremembering.
Right. So this was like a transgenerational trilogy. And when they put it out for the Wii U, they put motion controls back in the GameCube ones, right? Is that what you're referencing?
Yes. And actually, I don't know if you can play them without the motion controls. Because I remember there was kind of an uproar around it at the time. But I could also very well be playable with standard controls.
Yeah. Some of those Wii and Wii U control schemes were a little cumbersome, but I fondly remember like standing in the middle of my living room with the nunchuck and the Wiimote in front of my giant television playing Metroid, and it felt awesome. So maybe not a game that I would sit on the couch and kind of roll through, particularly given how much sort of like hand movement is required. But I really enjoyed just kind of, standing like a dummy in the middle of my living room and playing Metroid.
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of the games that had a weird, like, whether it's Wiimotes or like touch controls or other motion controls, like you just have to spend an extra hour reacclimating to something that is not a controller. But then after that, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine, like 90% of the time.
This has been quite a list of games. DJ and I will make sure that there's a list in the show notes for you. Make sure you pop that open on your, podcast app of choice and look through all the games that we've talked about. We'll include the notes there. What else? I think that's about it, right? You have until March 27th. The clock is ticking. About 2 months left, a month and a half at this point, to be able to get your hands on some of these games. So don't miss out.
Yeah, I have some shopping to do.
In the meantime, if you need any more video game hangover in your brain, you should follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/VGHangover. And you can always get show notes and links and tell us what you thought about this episode at VGHangover.com. You can join us on our Discord. You can hang out with us, chat about video games, tell us your favorite 3DS and Wii U games, so that DJ and I can add them to our lists as well.
We can just buy more games for
just
the
get all
store to shut down.
Games. They really should do a fire sale. It really should be like the last 24 hours, everything's $1 and just go crazy. But maybe they will. And we don't know that for a fact. But you get a link to our Discord at VGHangover.com. Yeah, I would not expect that. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and anywhere else you can get a podcast. And help us out by telling your friends about the show.
Yeah, that's great. Helps us get the word out and attract new listeners, so we really appreciate it. We want to give thanks again to Carl Brueggemann for our new intro and outro music this week. If you want to hear more of his work, you can go to carlbmusic.bandcamp.com and just add that entire discography to your cart and hit checkout.
We'll be back next week. Until then, this is Randy Dickinson.
This is DJ Ross.
Thanks for listening to Video Game Hangover. Goodbye.
Good night.
See ya.